I never thought much about birthdays. They were just another day, another passing year, until my last one. Now, every time someone asks me about it, I can't shake the memories, the fear, the dark, and the voices. It all started with a party invitation from my best friend, Jake. "Dude, you're turning 30, he had said with that usual enthusiasm in his voice. "We gotta celebrate it right, nightclub, drinks, dancing. It's all set up. Just say yes." I hesitated at first. I wasn't one for the loud scenes or packed crowds, but Jake had a way of convincing me. Maybe it was because I hadn't seen him in months, or maybe it was the promise of a night out to unwind, but I agreed. What's the worst that could happen? The night started off fine enough. I arrived at the club with a few other close friends. The place was alive with music, flashing lights, and people moving in sync to the beat. We found our table near the bar, and the drinks started flowing. The club was massive, 3 floors, each with its own vibe. The top floor was a rooftop area where the city lights glimmered in the distance. I remember thinking how different this was from my usual birthday celebrations, quiet dinners with a few friends, maybe a movie. But this was something else entirely. "Happy birthday, man!" Jake yelled over the pounding music, handing me a drink. "This is your night. Let's make it one to remember." I took the drink and clinked glasses with everyone. It was supposed to be fun, but there was something off. As I glanced around the room, I noticed a few people standing motionless in the shadows. They weren't dancing, talking, or even moving. They just stared at me. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks. After all, the lights and atmosphere could make anyone feel strange. But the longer I looked, the more uncomfortable I became. Their eyes were fixed on me, and even when I tried to look away, I could still feel their gaze burning into my skin. "You okay?" my friend Sarah asked, leaning in close. "Yeah, just. I don't know. Something feels weird," I replied, trying to shake off the feeling. As the night dragged on, the club started to feel smaller, darker. I found myself heading towards the restroom, hoping to clear my head. The hallway leading there was dimly lit, far away from the blaring music and crowds. As soon as I stepped in, I heard it, a whisper, soft but unmistakable, like someone was standing right behind me. "Don't turn around." I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as cold sweat trickled down my back. The voice was so close, but I knew no one was there. I hadn't seen anyone follow me. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself. "You're just hearing things," I muttered under my breath. "Get it together." But the whisper came again, louder this time. "Don't turn around." Against my better judgment, I did exactly what I was told not to. I turned. The hallway was empty, completely deserted. The only sound was the low hum of the music from the club, but even that felt distant now. I rushed to the restroom, splashing water on my face, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over me like a dark cloud. When I looked up into the mirror, my heart nearly stopped. Standing behind me, barely visible in the dim light, was a shadow. It wasn't just a reflection or a trick of the light. This thing, whatever it was, had no features, no form. Just darkness. And it was getting closer. I spun around, but again, nothing. The restroom was completely empty. "Jake," I whispered, my voice trembling. I needed to find him. I needed to get out of there. I rushed out of the restroom and back into the main area of the club, but something was wrong. The air felt thick, heavy, like I was moving through water. The people, once vibrant and full of life, now moved sluggishly, their faces pale and expressionless. I found Jake by the bar, laughing with a group of strangers, completely oblivious to what was happening. I grabbed his arm, my voice shaky. "Jake, we need to leave." He looked at me like I was crazy. "What?" "Dude, we just got here. Relax, have another drink." "No," I insisted. "Something's not right. I keep seeing things." Jake frowned, finally seeing the panic in my eyes. "All right, man, let's go outside for a bit. Clear your head." As we made our way to the rooftop, the strange stares from the people in the shadows followed us. The cold night air hit me as we stepped outside, and for a moment, I felt a sense of relief. The city stretched out below us, the lights twinkling like stars. But even here, something was off. The music from inside the club seemed to echo in the distance, warped and distorted. I don't know, man," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "There's something in there. I keep hearing things, seeing things that aren't real." Jake shook his head. "You're probably just drunk, man. Birthdays can do that to you." But before I could respond, the rooftop door creaked open, and Sarah stepped out, her face pale. "Did you guys see it?" My heart dropped. "See what?" "The woman," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's been following us since we got here. I thought it was just me, but I keep seeing her everywhere. She's always standing just in the corner of my vision, watching." Jake's face strained of color. "What are you talking about?" "I saw her too," I admitted. "But I thought it was just my mind playing tricks." The three of us stood there, the weight of the night settling over us like a suffocating blanket. We were all seeing it. The shadowy figures, the strange whispers. None of it was in our heads. "Let's get out of here," Sarah said, her voice trembling. Now. We didn't need any more convincing. We made our way down the stairs, back to the main floor of the club. But as we passed through the crowd, the people, the ones who had been moving and dancing, stopped. Every single one of them. They turned to face us, their eyes hollow, their faces expressionless. "Keep moving," Jake whispered. "Don't stop." We pushed through the crowd, but the air grew colder, and the whispers returned, this time louder, more insistent. I could feel something closing in on us, something unseen but undeniably there. When we finally burst through the front doors and into the street, the world outside felt impossibly quiet. The sounds of the city seemed distant, almost muted. We glanced at each other, breathless and terrified. "We have to go home," I muttered, looking at the others. "Now." But as we started walking, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been in that club wasn't done with us yet. And the worst part? I knew, deep down, it was coming home with us. We rushed back to my apartment, barely speaking a word the entire drive. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I could have sworn I saw something, or someone, sitting in the back seat, just out of sight. My heart pounded in my chest, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Jake sat beside me, silent, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous energy. Sarah, in the back, hadn't said a word since we left the club. She just kept staring out the window, her eyes wide, as if expecting something to jump out at her at any moment. When we finally pulled up to my apartment, the sense of relief I had hoped for never came. Instead, there was a heavy, oppressive feeling in the air, as though something dark had followed us home. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar space now feeling foreign and strange. The lights flickered for a moment as we entered, casting long shadows that seemed to move unnaturally against the walls. I flipped the switch a few times, but the lights continued to flicker, their weak glow barely illuminating the room. "Why does it feel like it's still with us?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I admitted, my throat dry. "But whatever it is, we need to figure out how to stop it." Jake closed the door behind him, locking it with a loud click. "Stop it? Man, we don't even know what it is." The three of us stood there in the living room, the silence between us thick with fear. My apartment, which had always been my safe space, now felt suffocating, as though the walls were closing in. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, darker, and the air was so cold that I could see my breath. Suddenly, Sarah let out a gasp, pointing toward the hallway. "Did you see that?" I spun around, my heart racing. There, at the end of the hallway, stood the same shadowy figure I had seen in the club. Its form was vague, almost formless, but its presence was undeniable. It was as if the darkness itself had taken shape, and it was watching us, waiting. "Get out of my house!" I shouted, though my voice betrayed the fear I felt. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, silently staring, its featureless face somehow more terrifying than if it had eyes. Jake stepped forward, his fists clenched. "We're not afraid of you," he yelled, but as soon as the words left his mouth, the figure moved. Not with a normal gait, but with a sudden, unnatural jerk, like it had skipped through space. One moment it was at the end of the hallway, and the next, it was closer, too close. Sarah screamed, backing up against the wall. "What is it? What does it want?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we needed to get out of there, and fast. But before I could move, the temperature dropped even further. It was freezing now, and I could feel the cold seeping into my bones. The lights flickered again, and when they came back on, the figure was gone. But the relief was short-lived. The whispers started again, low, guttural voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They echoed in my head, overlapping and growing louder until they were all I could hear. "Run," one of the voices whispered. "It's too late," said another. "Jake!" I yelled, but when I turned to him, his face had gone pale. His eyes were wide with terror as he stared at something behind me. I turned slowly, every muscle in my body tense with fear. The shadow was back, but this time, it wasn't alone. More figures, just as dark and formless, filled the hallway. They moved closer, their bodies twitching and jerking with every step, as if they were glitching through reality. "What do we do?" Sarah cried, her voice trembling. "We can't stay here," I said, my voice barely audible over the growing whispers. "We need to leave. Now." But as we turned to head for the door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. The room seemed to close in on us, the shadows growing larger, stretching across the walls, until they were all around us. "We can't get out," Jake whispered, his voice hoarse with fear. "We're trapped." I grabbed the doorknob, yanking on it with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the house itself had become a prison, and there was no escape. Suddenly, the lights went out completely, plunging us into total darkness. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and I could feel something cold brushing against my skin. The shadows were no longer just shadows, they were real, tangible, and they were reaching for us. I could feel their icy touch on my arms, pulling me, dragging me down. I struggled, but it was no use. They were too strong, and the more I fought, the tighter their grip became. "We can't fight it," Sarah sobbed. "We're going to die here." "No," I said through gritted teeth. "We're not going to die. We have to fight back." "But how? How do you fight something that isn't even human, something that doesn't exist in the same way we do?" And then I remembered something my grandmother had told me when I was a kid. She used to tell me stories about spirits and how they could only have power over you if you gave them permission, if you let fear control you. "We can beat this," I said, my voice stronger now. "We just have to stop being afraid." Jake looked at me like I was crazy. "How the hell are we supposed to do that?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But we have to try." The shadows were closing in, their cold, dark hands wrapping around my throat, cutting off my air. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. But I focused on my breathing, calming myself, reminding myself that this thing only had power over me if I let it. And then, slowly, the grip loosened. The shadows began to retreat, fading back into the walls. The whispers grew quieter, and the cold air began to lift. It was working. Jake and Sarah followed my lead, taking deep, steady breaths, calming their minds. The more we focused, the weaker the shadows became. "We're doing it," Sarah whispered, her voice full of hope. But just as quickly as the relief came, it vanished. The door to the hallway creaked open, and standing there was the woman Sarah had spoken of. Unlike the shadows, she had form, pale, gaunt, with long black hair that hung over her face. Her eyes, sunken, hollow, and filled with malice, locked onto mine. "You can't escape," she hissed, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You brought this on yourselves." I stood frozen, my mind racing. I could feel the fear creeping back in, threatening to undo everything we had done. The woman stepped closer, her footsteps echoing unnaturally in the quiet room. "Don't listen to her," I said, though my voice was shaky. "She's lying. We're in control." But the woman's presence was overwhelming. The air grew thick again, and the shadows began to stir. "I am always here," she whispered. "Always watching." And then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she raised her hand, pointing directly at me. I braced myself, expecting the worst. But instead of attacking, she simply smiled, a cold, cruel smile that chilled me to my core. "We'll meet again," she said, her voice low and menacing. "Soon." And just like that, she was gone. The lights flickered back on, the room returning to its normal state as though nothing had happened. But I knew this wasn't over. The three of us stood there, stunned, unsure of what to say or do. The oppressive weight in the air had lifted, but the fear lingered. We had survived, but something had changed. The house, the club, the night itself, it had left a mark on us, one that we couldn't easily shake. "We need to leave," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This place, it's not safe." Jake nodded in agreement, his usual bravado completely gone. Sarah, pale and shaken, didn't argue. As we left my apartment, I couldn't help but glance back one last time. The shadows were gone, the whispers silenced, but the feeling of being watched remained. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The dark, whatever it was, wasn't finished with us yet. And deep down, I knew that the next time it came, we might not be so lucky,